Hi there, my name's Simon from CramTheExam.com and welcome to week 9, day 5 of your 12-week preparation course for your FCE, CAE and Matura Advanced exams. It's Friday today, which means it's speaking day, and today we are going to concentrate on the FCE speaking exam. Now, we've gone through the questions already, so now what's left is the business end of things. We're going to have a look at how you are marked in the exam. I'm going to show you what the examiners look at in terms of what grade, or to determine what grade they give you based on your no doubt wonderful answers to the questions in the speaking exam. And a lot of what we're going to see today is going to back up what I've been saying through all of the previous videos that I've done for you guys, so you can see why what I have said makes sense. It's because most of what I've said is going to be reflected in the marking guide. So without wasting any more time, let's get stuck straight into it. Okay, before I go through the table behind me, as scary as that looks, just give me a few seconds to explain a few things. When you go into the exam room, you'll see that there are two examiners. This should be no shock to you, particularly if you've seen my previous videos over the last couple of weeks. You will have seen that there are two examiners in the room. One has the job of leading the exam. The other has the job of sitting in the corner and saying nothing, but listening very carefully. These two examiners both mark you, but they mark you and they give you a score in slightly different ways. The person who's sitting in the corner has the responsibility of listening very carefully, breaking down what you say into a lot more detail, and seeing where your ability lies in relation to this chart that you can see behind me. And in fact, that examiner has something like this chart to check your English language ability and English language level. The person who's talking to you also has a marking chart, but it's a lot more simplified, and we'll go through that in a second. And they have the chance to not analyse your ability in detail, because that would be really difficult, as well as leading the exam, to also micromanage or microanalyse your English style. So they have a more global view, a more general view of your English language ability in relation to the questions. So this is the sheet that the guy or the lady in the corner has, who says nothing but listens very carefully. So let's go through this sheet in a bit more detail. The first thing to know is that your score, your result will be in the form of a band. So band 0 all the way here at the bottom to band 5 all the way at the top. Obviously 0 is not very good, making with a heavy sense of understatement, and number 5 is fantastic. You've got the highest marks, and you've got bands in the middle. Now, you're assessed in 4 areas: grammar and vocabulary, discourse management, pronunciation, and interactive communication. What are these? Grammar and vocabulary speak for themselves. It's your ability to use a wide range of grammar, or for you to show your grammar skills, and for you to show your range of vocabulary. Discourse management looks at how you respond to questions and what your answers are like. Do you respond fluently? Do you respond with hesitation? What you say, does it make sense? Or does it make logical sense? So does everything flow? Is everything in a nice order? Does one thing link onto the next thing? So you've got linkers and transitions to think about there. Is it stop, start, stop, start, stop, start? Is it difficult to listen to because you don't really know what you're trying to say? So discourse management talks about how you handle your answers, how you communicate your answers. And if you think back to the previous videos where I've broken down the FCE and CAE videos which are available online, you can already start to think about discourse management. How good were the answers? Were they fluent? Were they stop-start? How did they seem to you? Then you've got pronunciation, which is straightforward, and interactive communication, which looks at how you work with the person that you're sitting next to you, because at multiple points throughout the exam, namely part 3 and part 4, you have got to interact with them. So how is your interaction? Is it good interaction? Are you asking the right questions? Are you responding to the right questions? Do you understand what that person is saying? Who is leading the conversation? Is it balanced conversation? Who's taking control? Who's not taking control? Etc, etc. So it's all about how you guys interact. So once again, you can think back to those previous videos we've looked at, and you can ask yourself, what was the interaction like? Was it good, natural, positive interaction, or was it difficult, hesitant, stop-start interaction? Did they really interact at all? So you can have a look at the previous videos and make those judgments for yourself. So those are the bands, and those are the areas that the examiners will look at, particularly the one sitting in the corner. So let's go into these in a bit more detail and show you how easy it is to get the highest marks. So for grammar and vocabulary, band 5, it says, shows a good degree of control of a range of simple and some complex grammatical forms, uses a range of appropriate vocabulary to give and exchange views on a wide range of familiar topics. Now, there is a little bit more to marking your score than just this. This is a simplified form for our benefit. The markers have something which is a little bit more detailed. So the advice that I'm going to give you is just this. My advice based on my interpretation of what this says. So don't take what I say as being gospel, but something which can help you in understanding what's expected from you in the English exam. So it says here, shows a good degree of control of a range of simple grammatical forms. That means that you can use the simple form, continuous form, present perfect form, present continuous form, simple conditionals, simple relative clauses and across time frames, past, present and future. This isn't difficult. Everyone can do that. This is not, and as we've seen in the previous videos, there's plenty of scope to do this, as long as you remember what each form is for. So why do we use the simple? Why do we use the continuous? Why do we use the perfect? Etc. etc. So you can use the simple form, the continuous form, the perfect form. These are okay as long as you use them correctly. And if you use them correctly, which largely depends on context and a good understanding of why these forms are used, you are going to score highly. So you need a good control of the basics. In short, you need to use the basics well, you need to use the basics accurately, and you should be able to do this at B2 anyhow. Now then it says, let me just get rid of that, and then it says, and some complex grammatical forms. So at B2 level, it's not looking for a great deal of complexity. It's looking for some complex grammatical forms. So if you use a little bit of inversion, if you use conditionals with modal forms, if you use if you use passive and the active, if you use even perfect passive, for example, or something like this, you just have to choose a couple of those areas and see if you can use them. And if you go back to the videos that I've had a look at, and you've had a look at the example questions, analyze those questions and ask yourself, how can I use, for example, a future passive form in this context? How can I create the context to use a third conditional in this context? So you've got to ask yourself those questions, and that's part of your preparation for this exam. So good knowledge of the basics, some complex grammatical forms. And it even says here a good degree of control. So the examiners are not looking for perfection. You can have some mistakes as long as largely you know what you're doing and you're doing it correctly. So this is a bit of a get out of jail free card with complex grammatical forms, because to me this says if you try to use some complex grammatical forms but you make a few mistakes, as long as it doesn't stop the examiner understanding what it is that you're trying to say, you're going to get points for that. So you should at least try to use some complex grammatical forms. Now, if you want to know what complex grammatical forms are, then go hunt out my video, which I did on a Friday a good few weeks back. I think it was week 5, where I went through the grammar that you need to know. So that's what I identify as advanced grammar forms, so go and check out that video. Onto vocabulary. Uses a range of appropriate vocabulary to give and exchange views on the wide range of familiar topics. So a range of appropriate vocabulary. So this says two things. First of all, we've got to have a good knowledge of antonyms and synonyms. We're not just talking about basic A1, A2 level adjectives like good, bad, nice, but we're looking for something more complex than that. And we're looking for something which is appropriate. So this says that you're looking for the correct choice of vocabulary, whether it's an adjective, adverb, or noun, for what you're talking about. So, for example, a typical Polish mistake would be, instead of saying transport links, you would talk about communication links, because komunikacja and communication are false friends. So this would be an example of inappropriate vocabulary, which should be correct at this level. And then you've got exchange views on the wide range of familiar topics. So exchange views, this talks about the kind of questions that you would use to interact. So what do you think about this? Tell me what you know about this. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? And so on, so on. Here, if we have a look at the bands, for band number 3, it says the good degree of control of simple grammatical forms, which is what it says up here, and some complex grammatical forms. So in other words, if you and attempts, sorry, here's a key word here. Let me just circle that again. And attempts some grammatical forms. So for number 5, you attempt and you largely get it right. For band number 3 is that you attempt and you make a bit of a hash of it and it doesn't go right. But at least you get recognition for attempting it. Whereas for band number 1, it just talks about simple grammatical forms. There's no use of advanced grammatical forms at all. So in short, the more advanced grammatical forms you use, the better your mark should be. Okay, let's get rid of all of that information and let's go on to discourse management. Produces extended stretches of language with very little hesitation. I know I've made a bit of a mess of the highlighting there, so let me do that again. Very little hesitation. Now go back to those videos which we had a look at the other week. People saying one or two words and then going, this is hesitation, and we want to eliminate hesitation. And hesitation, getting rid of hesitation can be difficult. If you're nervous, for example, if you're doing the exam, then you might be a very confident English speaker, but the pressure of the exam might make you hesitate. So the only thing that you can do there is simply practice as much as you can in order to feel as confident as you can before you go into the exam. Contributions are relevant and there is a clear organisation of ideas. Clear organisation of the ideas. So this links to transitions, discourse markers, conjunctions and so on. And so you can borrow your knowledge from the writing exam for the speaking exam. So firstly, secondly, thirdly, however, consequently, moreover, as a result, and so on, so on. So what you're doing is you're using these very, very clear signposts to show the examiner what it is that you're thinking. So this is something that you can practice. So for example, if there's a question where you've got to give your opinions, then you might just say, I think this, I think this, I think this. But you could also say, firstly, I think this, then or secondly, I think this, and lastly, I think this. So just throwing in these little signposts or discourse markers will help you a lot when it comes to marks. And it says right here, uses a range of cohesive devices and discourse markers. So if you use them, and if you use a number of them, then you're going to get the benefit for it, and you'll get grade 5. Just to have a look at the other bands, Band 3 produces extended stretches of language despite some hesitation. So some hesitation is okay as long as it doesn't get in the way of what it is that you're trying to say. Contributions are relevant and there is very little repetition. I'm not sure if you remember the videos. There was a fair bit of repetition. One person was repeating what the other person was saying. And in some contexts, I said that was good as long as you use that as a lead-in to your own opinion. If you just copy what someone else says, then that's bad. But if you copy what someone else says and then says, I think this, or I disagree with this and I think this, then that's okay. Uses a range of cohesive devices. So cohesive devices would be things much more like simple conjunctions, and, but, so, yet, and so on. Whereas if you start using things like firstly, secondly, thirdly, overall, consequently, however, etc., then that pushes you up into band 5. And then number 1 produces responses which are extended beyond short phrases despite hesitation. So these are very short answers. Contributions are mostly relevant despite some repetition. So in other words, you're kind of answering the question, but not really, and uses basic cohesive devices. So and, but, and that's about it. So you can see how the progression works here. Using lots of discourse markers, using lots of linkers, eliminating or trying to avoid hesitation as best as you can, and organising your ideas in a clear way. All of this can be practiced. Okay, pronunciation. Now, I'm not a huge fan of marking pronunciation in exams. I've had a fair bit of experience working with students who have been told that they failed exams because of pronunciation, which I think is really, really, really unfair. Obviously, if you sound like a Russian enemy in a James Bond film, you're going to have a little bit of difficulty with pronunciation. But my general advice for pronunciation is to speak slowly, calm down, try not to sound like a machine gun firing off, but just slow yourself down, calm down, and just speak normally and without panic in your voice. And I gave this advice to, as an anecdote, a number of years ago. I was working with a girl just for a few lessons who was studying English philology in Krakow, and she failed her English exam 3 or 4 times on the basis of pronunciation, and which I found grossly unfair because her English was fantastic, but for some reason they weren't happy with her pronunciation, and she spoke Polish and English incredibly quickly, just off she went as fast as she can. And my advice to her was just go into the exam and make yourself as unhappy as possible. Speak as slowly as if you possibly can, as if you're telling someone that someone, I don't know, has died or something like this. And just speak slowly and be unhappy. And we practiced this for a couple of lessons, and she did the exam and she passed just because she did that. So I'm not a huge fan of pronunciation, but as I said, if it's clear that you've got some pronunciation issues and this has been identified by the teachers that you've worked with, then it would be good to work on this, but I would not recommend standing in front of a mirror for 3 or 4 hours every single day practicing perfect mouth forms and so on, because it's going to be a waste of time. There are some words which are frequently mispronounced and this would vary from language to language. So see if you can find out what those are for your mother language. I know certainly for Polish I can think of a number of words which are commonly mispronounced. So these are words that you can learn how to say them correctly, but try to find those out. Try to find out the basic mistakes and work on eliminating those. Interactive communication Initiates and responds appropriately, linking contributions to those of other speakers. Initiates and responds appropriately. So not only are you asking, what do you think about this? Well, give me your thoughts on this. But you're also responding to the question as well. Answering the question. So just because you get asked a question doesn't mean that you can talk about whatever the hell you like. You've got to respond to that question. Linking contributions of those of other speakers. So referring back to what that person said earlier on, or looping the conversation back round. So if you practice this, it's quite possible to do. So, for example, part 3, you talk about the first issue, you get through to the second or third issue, and then you loop it back to the first one. Particularly what the other person said about the first one. And if you can create those loops, it means that you're listening, you're engaging, and you're responding. Maintains and develops the interaction and negotiates towards an outcome. So this basically says that you don't let the conversation die out. You don't just go, yeah, and then the other person goes, yeah. And then you look at the examiner for help. This is not a good way, and you saw that in some of the videos that we've had a look at already. You've got to come to a conclusion. So I think this, what do you think about this? I think this, what do you think about this? So what do we think then? Or how shall we agree? Or do we agree? You've got to find a nice natural way of coming to a conclusion. Initiates and responds appropriately for band 3, maintains and develops the interaction and negotiates towards an outcome with very little support. So how do I understand this? Well, let's bear in mind for band 1, keeps the interaction with very little prompting and support. So here, there's no prompting, there's no support. So the conversation is natural, it continues and it works as a normal natural conversation. And if you go back to, I think it was part 4 of the CAE video that we had a look at last week, there was that bit at the end which was perfect for this. It was the part 4 question was not going very well, and if I remember correctly, right at the end it breathed into life, and then you had a wonderful natural conversation. That is band 5, whereas before it was band 3 or even lower. So avoiding prompting, avoiding support, and this goes back to how I asked you guys to prepare for this, by saying you've got to be able to speak for a minute or 2 minutes about topics. You've got to be able to brainstorm. You've got to be able to think of 3 or 4 things that you can say about lots of different things at short notice. So this is where you need to practice. So that's the, I know there's a lot of information there, and you might have to listen to the video a couple more times just to make sure you get all of those points. But that's how you get more of band 5 than perhaps band 3 or band 1. Bands 4 and 2 are in the middle of bands 3 and 5. There's not much I can say to explain the thinking there. That largely comes down to the examiner, I guess. The examiner has also got to feel that you are confident with your English, and this is where the psychology of the exam comes in. If you remember back to one of the first videos I said, particularly about part 1 and part 1, and when you enter the room, nice big smile, nice confidence, loud voice, and the psychology changes. The examiners think, aha, I've got someone here who might know what they're doing. And there they start to give you the benefit of the doubt straight away. So that might be the thing that helps turn a band 4 into a band 3, for band 4 into a band 5, for example. So that psychology of the exam is also important. Okay, let's have a look at the other marking sheet for the examiner who's talking to you. Okay, so this is the marking sheet for the person who's talking to you, and you can see global achievement. In other words, generally, how well did you do? Let's have a look at band 5. Handles communication on a range of familiar topics, very little hesitation, uses accurate and appropriate linguistic resources to express ideas and produce extended discourse that is generally coherent. In other words, what you're asked to answer, you can answer, and you do it confidently with little hesitation. You use accurate and appropriate linguistic resources. In other words, you use the correct grammar and the correct vocabulary to express ideas, and produce extended discourse that is generally coherent. So in other words, that you can speak at a reasonable length in a way that makes sense. Which isn't too difficult, is it? So if they ask you to talk about something, you can talk about it. You can talk about it with confidence, with little hesitation, because you've practiced your brainstorming skills. You use accurate grammar and vocabulary, largely, to tell the examiner what you're thinking, and you can do that in a way that lasts for more than one sentence. There we go. Band 5. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Now take that back, this way of marking band 5, and ask yourself, about the videos that we saw over the last couple of weeks, did they manage to do this? Did they handle communication on the range of familiar topics? Yes. Did they do it with very little hesitation? Yeah, some did, some didn't. Use accurate and appropriate linguistic resources? Largely yes. Largely yes. There were a few vocabulary errors, but generally. To express ideas, did they express their ideas? They could have done it in a better way. As I remember my criticisms of the video, I wanted to hear more of, this is what I think, tell me what you think, and so on, so on. Produce extended discourse. Did they talk for longer than a sentence? Yeah. And it's generally coherent? Largely yes, although there was, I think it was the Argentinian girl for the FCE, who had difficulty in being generally coherent. And of course, being coherent also talks about mumbling. In other words, talking underneath your breath. So if you do the exam like this and no one really knows what's going on, then you're going to lose points. So head up, speak confidently, let the examiner hear what it is that you're trying to say. Handles communication of familiar topics despite some hesitation. So here there's some umming and ahhing. So organizes extended discourse, but occasionally produces utterances that lack coherence. So sometimes you say things which don't make sense, and some inaccuracies and inappropriate usage occur, and here you make some errors. So you can see there's a clear difference between band number 3 and band number 5. So from the point of view of the examiner who's talking to you, this is about as much as they can do, and they will be able to classify you quite easily based on these guidelines. So these rules, as I've gone through, are things that I've been saying over the last 9 weeks or so, and I will continue to say over the next couple of weeks. So there we go. I know there was a lot of information there to take in. I would ask you to watch the video again, and I would also ask you to have a look at the videos, the speaking videos that I did over the last couple of weeks for those candidates who are doing the exam. Bearing in mind, particularly the marking sheet for global achievement. Did they hesitate? Did they make mistakes? Did they speak for longer than for a sentence? Did they make sense in what they said? These are the general topics for the global achievement. Think about that and ask yourself, could you, and if you think the answer to some of those questions is no, then ask yourself, what would I say? How would I answer that? And then practice some questions. Find some questions on the internet or use your books to find some questions. Record yourself. Look back at those recordings and ask yourself, am I making sense here? Am I hesitating at all? Is what I'm saying logical? Is it in order? And so on, so on. So these are questions that you can ask yourself. And this is why recording yourself, watching it, doing it again, recording it, watching it, doing it again it's really awkward at the beginning. It's really difficult at the beginning, but this is a fantastic way to get ready for the speaking exam. So this week we had to look at the FCE in some detail. If you've got any questions at all about anything that I've covered in this video, then please leave a comment below and I will get back to you. Next week we're going to have a look. Next week on Friday we're going to have a look at the CAE speaking video, or the CAE speaking examination marking sheet. Just as we did in this video, we'll break that down as well, and we'll see the differences between the CAE and the FCE. So I'll see you next Friday for that, but I'll also see you on Monday for Monday's writing questions. So have a good weekend, and I'll see you soon.